Well, I just want to welcome everyone to Exploring Divine Resonance. It's our 6th week together. Our focus for today is on the process as I perceive it that we're working through as human beings and some tools to support us in that work, or at least the spiritual aspects of that work. I want to welcome everyone who's here in the Zoom room and participating through the simulcast on YouTube, and also everyone who's part of the circle through the podcast, and in any other way that you are participating or listening or here with us in this circle. It's an honor to be with you. I'm excited that we get to move into an exploration of, I guess the headline for today could be practical spirituality. It'll be an interesting topic to explore with words. I think we'll have a meaningful exploration in transmission, and inevitably the conversation will be meaningful as well. I'm glad you're here. Let's set everything else aside, energetically, emotionally, physically, and otherwise. And as you begin making your way into this circle, just a gentle reminder, as always, please don't operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. With your eyes closed, breathing in and out through the nostrils, palms to the sky, if all of that is comfortable for you. Finding the place in the circle that resonates most for you. Deep breath in, hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before in this day, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in, hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since we last gathered, all the way out to the count of 8. And if this is your first time in the circle, back to the first of the year. Another deep breath in, hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since you were born, all the way out to the count of 8. Another deep breath in. Hold. And as you begin releasing this breath now, letting go of everything that has come before since the inception of your soul, all the way out to the count of 8. For whatever remains in separation, I invite you to remove the universal plug. I'll do the same. And with your permission, let's begin. I wanted to take just a couple of moments to reflect on how I perceive the human journey or the journey in spirituality. To me, they're the same thing. To sort of set the stage a little bit, I'm not trying to superimpose my perceptual view over yours at all. I'm simply wanting to share my perspective so that what follows has some context. So if you just think about your life in terms of maybe the most essential level of experience, in my language, that would be experiences of resonance or experiences of dissonance. And we could spend some time trying to define these terms. We've talked and explored them before. But for now, and maybe forever, let's leave it at whatever you perceive, however you perceive those terms. It's perfect, whatever your perspective is on them. And if we go in a little bit deeper, it's, at least from my perspective, it's easy to categorize experiences of dissonance as originating out of a perspective of that originates or that comes from the illusion of separation. And that may also be true of experiences of resonance, but there are certain kinds of experiences of resonance, namely those that sustain of their own accord, that are, to my view, experiences of the whole self. That is to say, of wholeness. And it's not wholeness that I can describe or that you can describe, or at least to the way I perceive it, that any of us could describe, no matter how much time or effort we put into it. Our descriptions will fall short of the complete expression, or even more meaningfully, from my perspective, the complete experience of our wholeness, which, to the way I see things, is innate. So what's going on with this tension, let's say, between dissonance and resonance? Well, to me, that's the process that we're working through as human beings. And it's a really simple process, even though, at least if I just think about myself, I have a tendency to complicate it, or at least I have had a tendency. And over time, that tendency has led to a more simple version of it. But even still, when I get caught up in separation, when I get caught up in experiences of dissonance, they can become rather dominant and they can appear to be very complicated. But if we just distill that down, that complicated dynamic of dissonance, however you define it, and just think of it as an invitation to the other kind of experience, it's the pathway, the passageway through which we have an opportunity to pass, such that more and more of our lives are experienced in resonance. Okay, so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that what I'm saying makes sense and that we all agree that, this is at least a plausible explanation. It seems to me that the next question is, okay, and how do we actually make that happen? And that's where tools come into play. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of tools. And I think one of the things that's sort of interesting, if we think back on the prior 5 weeks, is that the kinds of tools that we deploy or that resonate with us, that we feel naturally drawn to wanting to deploy, tend to relate to the stage of consciousness that we're in or the stage of consciousness that we're stepping into. So certain approaches might feel very deeply resonant, and other approaches or other tools might not. And that's great. The key here, of course, is what resonates for you, what you feel drawn to. And I'm not interested in trying to suggest that the way or the tools, let's say, that God expresses through me are the best tools, the only tools, or that they're somehow better than other tools that are available. All I can say is this is the world that I marinate in. This is the experience that I have. And I can talk a little bit about that. But I mean, maybe that's interesting. Far more interesting, at least from my perspective, is if you have an opportunity to experience that. And before we go into that at a deeper level, I just want to set these tools, the sum of the tools that God expresses through me, in the context of, let's say, other tools that are available. One of which, it's sort of interesting, I was utilizing in a much greater way. It played a bigger part in our circle as we opened at the beginning, and it plays a much smaller part. Maybe it's not even there much anymore, which is sort of surprising to me, actually. I would have expected it to continue. And that's a tool that we can just think of as meditation. And there are lots of different kinds of meditation, right? You could meditate anyway. I don't need to spell all that out. We all know what the kinds of meditation are. But meditation as a general concept certainly is a tool for navigating experiences of dissonance and experiences of resonance, to deepening the experience of resonance and converting or transforming experiences of dissonance into experiences of resonance. And there are different types of meditation. I mean, one that I'm thinking of that's a tool that is widely used is referred to as mindfulness. And this is such a wonderful, powerful tool. I perceive tremendous value in the shift from stage 1 consciousness into stage 2 consciousness around mindfulness, especially for those that are really sort of getting started doing spiritual work. If for no other reason, then there tends to be a very strong identification with the thought patterns or the emotional patterns that tend to dominate in stage 1. And one of the gifts of mindfulness is the awareness, I am not my emotions, I am not the thoughts that I'm having, excuse me. And that is very wonderful and powerful. And it tracks beautifully in the shift from stage 1 to stage 2. So meditation, mindfulness. And there's another set of tools that we could sort of broadly classify, or that I think of as modalities. And there are a number of different modalities. I suppose some people might think of mindfulness as an example of a modality, but another well-known example of a modality might be Reiki, and there are an endless array of modalities that are available. It's sort of interesting as kind of a preview. I know I mentioned this last week. At some point, we'll have an opportunity to shift, or we'll make a transition from exploring divine resonance into the next free class that I'll be offering is called Introduction to Spiritual Messenger Mastery. And one of the things that happens with messengers is that there's this real draw towards structure in response to being called into the unknown, into the mystery. And so modalities can play a really prominent role for messengers in terms of becoming certified in a modality. But modalities also play another role in terms of that interior dynamic. So that might be a tool that many, or perhaps darn near everyone in this circle, has utilized at one point or is currently utilizing as a resource for supporting that shift from experiences of dissonance to more and more resonance. One of the things that's sort of interesting and fascinating and confusing and wonderful, and I don't know what else, you fill in the blank for how you feel about it, is that if I try to contain or describe what God does through me when we come into transmission together, I might have some very effective ways of describing some of that. For example, I might talk about, or as we explored a couple of weeks ago, soul embodiment is something that I perceive that happens very naturally as part of that process. And we could think of that as a spiritual practice, and we've explored to some degree some of the things that are available to us when we engage in soul embodiment. But there's so much more going on, right? It's sort of this open-ended dynamic in the sense that, well, we might be able to understand, let's say, soul embodiment, or for those of you who have done other study and work with me, you might be familiar with Beneath the Sand as a practice of the visceral experience of one's wholeness, and there are a variety of other things that I've taught and that I facilitate, or that God expresses through me, and so on. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't try to contain any of these under a particular label, even though to some degree I do, for the sake of trying to have a conversation or describe at least some of what's happening. But at the end of the day, a lot of, at least to my perception, a lot of the things that are going on when we're in transmission sort of move us beyond the conventional structures that are available in these other ways, these other tools, and invite us into a more intimate experience with divinity. And as long as we don't get confused about a deeper experience of divinity with a deeper experience with me, and you just recognize that what is being enlivened within you is actually the divine, not something that I'm installing, or it's not my energy, and so on, it almost opens this door to a different kind of developmental work. Not so much a transition from stage 1 to 2, nor of the mastery of stage 2, and of which there are extraordinary and wonderful resources out in the world that I think would be much more effective, let's say, than trying to get me to teach or focus on those things. But very much in the transition from stage 2 into stage 3, I would say, is one of the places, and certainly in the transition from 3 to 4, is one of the places where there's a lot of support in the kinds of things that tend to take place. Let's call them the tools that God expresses through me. And it's not that they're not helpful in the transition to 1 to 2 or in working more deeply at 2. It's that, as I wrote, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but as I shared in my From My Heart, I think one way to think of me isn't necessarily as the soul archaeologist, although I think that's a wonderful description of how God works through me. But another way of thinking about it would be as the surrender accelerator. It's like my secret alter identity. If I were to have a 1950s font and a shirt that had something on it that described me, it would say the surrender accelerator. Here's how God is expressing through me. So one of the things to just think about or reflect on or open to in your interior space, and I'm going to kind of open or close my eyes now, and if you've had yours open, maybe invite you to turn inward and reflect on this within yourself, is where are the gifts showing up for you right now of separation? Where are those gifts? They might be wrapped up in experiences of dissonance. But every experience of dissonance, to my way of seeing it, is really just an aspect of your whole self that isn't yet embodied and integrated. And they tend to express or show up really in 2 stages of consciousness. I mean, there's some in the 3rd stage, but they're really in stage 1 and stage 2. Stage 3 is kind of more of a clearinghouse, and let's call it both the beginning and the transition into 3, the beginning of surrender, and also later in stage 3, the end of surrender, which is very, very interesting. Something if anyone wants to explore that further in the Q&A. I mean, I'm happy to talk about anything, but that might be a particularly interesting thing to talk about, especially as it relates to these tools. Okay, so what is the opportunity here? And again, I'm just trying to keep this at a very simple level. I mean, there are, I perceive this sort of endless array of tools that we could be working on. We could dive more deeply into a category of tools that I think of as relating to spiritual mastery, which I think of as the interior, the sort of vertical interior aspect of one's relationship with divinity, one's experience of divinity. And then in the second aspect, or the second category of tools, are tools related to spiritual messenger mastery, which I perceive as more of a horizontal kind of embodiment, and that because they relate to the manner in which and the consciousness in which we are interacting, not just within ourselves and with divinity, but also now as we interact with others, in that the interior dynamic becomes a more public dynamic. That is to say, I become consciously aware of my interior relationship with divinity and the ways in which that presence expresses as I am with others. And I don't mean I just mean I'm trying to articulate it in a clear way as we all think about this within ourselves. So at least for today, I think it's helpful to focus in on tools related to spiritual mastery rather than spiritual messenger mastery. And in particular, to sort of the first step in the process. And what I perceive as if we're just going to focus on one thing, the most important and essential tool there is soul embodiment, which we've talked about already. But I want to kind of move deeper with this and start exploring with you a little bit with words and in a deeper way experientially here in a few minutes, what the real opportunity is with soul embodiment. We've talked about soul embodiment as an enlivenment of everything that is within you. But I mean, you could also think of life as an enlivenment of everything that is within you. And all you have to do is think back to the most recent experience of dissonance that sort of was existing outside of the container of what your mind thought it understood about how your life was going. I'm sure there's a random or unexpected experience of resonance that cropped in there at some point. That's beautiful, and that's there it is happening, presumably outside the context of soul embodiment. But then there's also this other aspect of soul embodiment, which is enlivening the things that we're not, right? The dissonance. And again, life is already offering us opportunities. I would venture to guess there's not a single person in the circle here who has engaged in today, much less any day in the last week, much less any month in your life, where your buttons didn't get pushed on some level. Something didn't stir you up at some basic level. And so in a sense, soul embodiment is this concentrated dynamic of the experience of what is going on in life already. So how can we shift that sort of background or the foundation of what brings us today together into the circle and utilize the gifts of those experiences of resonance and dissonance that are already there that may be enlivened further as we sit together, or maybe it's other things that are showing up, and then actually to transmute. Keep in mind, transmutation, there are really two ways to think of transmutation, right? Transmutation on the one hand is like a log that is consumed by a fire. If the fire's hot enough, the log is transmuted. Maybe there's a little bit of ash remaining, but effectively nothing that resembles the log remains. And if you think about that in terms of the dissonance that gets enlivened, this is where we run into some challenges, because from the perspective of the separate self, the idea of transmuting these traumas or wounds, if we just use that as a really rough headline for, or a category for those things, the separate self is thinking, okay, great, let's transmute all that stuff so we can get on to a deeper experience of resonance. And ultimately, that's what's happening, and that does happen. But we have to be careful, because the separate self is constantly projecting. It's constantly imagining what a deeper experience of resonance would look like, and it wants to get done with, it wants to get done with stuff. Chop, chop, let's get on with this. Let's move these things off the table. Maybe it's just my separate self that does that. Maybe that doesn't resonate with you, but I've heard plenty of people refer to it in similar ways. I'd like to get done with all this work so I can get on with what I'm meant to do, or what I'm here to do. And what I want to offer to you is that the work of engaging in this is an essential part of what we're all here to do, which one way of saying it is to actually have an embodied experience of who we really are. And as paradoxical or counterintuitive as it might be, when we get our buttons pushed, there is that opening to a deeper experience of who we really are. So there's an alchemy that takes place between these two points of polarity. On the one hand, the deep embodied presence of divinity, and on the other hand, whatever that experience is that's being enlivened of the separate self. And when we combine these together, the gift of separation is unwrapped. It begins to be transmuted, but only when you feel it. Only when you allow yourself to feel it. So I just want to introduce 3 ways. There's an infinite number of ways we could do this, right? But here are 3 ways which you can engage in as we move into transmission here. If you have the resources available, there, at least 2 of these require some resources beyond just sitting where you are. But there's also then an invitation to revisit the transmission at some other time and engage with one or other, or maybe both of these other ways of sort of practicing soul embodiment and the transmutation that's available. I'm forever promising a simple summary, and then I get so excited and carried away. I go into things at a deeper level. And I trust that that serves, but I also think it's meaningful to have a simple summary. So here is the simple summary. For transmuting, in utilizing the tool of soul embodiment, you can sit with your feelings and feel them, or the discomfort, the pain, or whatever it is in your body, and allow it to express fully and to feel it as we go into soul embodiment together. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to write, to journal. And as you're journaling, you're feeling things. Oftentimes, I've noticed when I'm working in a group of people and somebody is giving voice to their experience, sometimes giving voice becomes an arm's length practice. In other words, if I can describe it, I don't have to feel it. So the challenge I want to issue to you is, if or when you choose to journal while engaged in soul embodiment, in the practice of soul embodiment, which I'm going to facilitate for you, I'm going to support that aspect. The most essential part, as with all of these, is to feel whatever's coming up. So you might even get into a place of automatic writing, if that language makes sense to you, where you just let it come out. Don't even try to filter it. Get into the feeling and be writing. There it is. Okay, that's the second one. And the third application of this tool, among many, many others, of course, would be to create art. And there are lots of different kinds of art that you could create. But let's just pick one. You can pick any of them, right? But I'm just going to talk about, let's say, painting. So you might be painting or drawing and feeling. That's the key, to feel. It's my perception that when we get into the arts, the veil between the feeling and the expression of it thins. I don't know if that's true for true artists or not, but whether or not it is, the invitation I'm issuing is to thin that as much as you can. In other words, get to the raw feeling, allow it to express. And if it's being expressed as you create art, that is paint or draw or whatever, you could do this in a pottery studio. There are lots of different applications. People can write music, on and on and on, right? But let's just focus on these 3 for now. Okay. Many other tools we could explore, but for today, let's just focus on this one tool and these 3 applications. And whichever one you choose to engage in next as we transition into deeper transmission, which the way of saying it is, I'm just going to drop language here in a moment. Just be with it fully as you're able to right now. And be fully present with whatever comes up. Don't try to be looking for, and then what, or when is this going to be done? The other thing I want to say is that if I'm bringing the transmission to a close, or I'm making a transition between deeper transmission and Q&A, and you're still in deep process and you want to stay in the circle, but you don't have a question and you don't really want to participate in the Q&A, just turn the volume off. Just turn the volume off and sit in the circle and continue to, or you can pause the session before I say the words And I'll say this, if you want to continue this, just pause the session now. And then when you start it up again, that'll be the concluding process for you. The point is, when you pause the session, the transmission continues in that space. Okay? All right. The last thing I want to say is, if you have a question right now, we're not going to address them. We're going to go into transmission, but write it down. So many people have said, I get to the Q&A and my mind is a blank. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because I'm trying to do something to drain. I'm not trying to do anything actually in the transmission. Separate I. There's a process that's unfolding that's really between you and the divine. But if there is a question, it may well disappear in the interim. So if you want to write it down, this is a good time to do that. And I will say this, if you're concluding with this part of the transmission, I invite you to return the universal plug, knowing the transmission will come to a close. Otherwise, we'll continue here in just a moment with a deeper transmission. I'm grateful for I'm grateful you're here as part of this circle, exploring divine resonance. And for those of you who are participating outside of the Zoom circle, who would like to be part of the Zoom circle, you can always register for the class. It's free to do so at exploringdivineresonance.com. Opening into our second segment for today, the transmission. I'm affirming the plug has been pulled and we have begun. Whichever of the three suggested or any other way that you might choose to engage with this tool, this soul embodiment tool, I invite you to engage with it fully now, remembering to set everything else aside. And as always, please do not operate a motor vehicle or heavy equipment of any sort during this or any time we're together. The river is flowing. Be the river. Be. And what's in front of you here, the invitation, the opportunity, to the degree that you're ready to allow yourself to feel and be with whatever is coming up, physically, emotionally, energetically, or otherwise. And if nothing is coming up, well, that's wonderful. Nothing's going wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. In fact, you can't mess this up. Whatever is happening is perfect. Seven. Don't worry about the numbers. Don't worry about anything. In fact, you can let my voice go. Nothing that I'm saying even approaches the level of importance to your interior experience of whatever is unfolding. Even if what is unfolding is nothing, a void, an absence of anything. The river is flowing. With each breath, you are connected to everyone, everything, the divine, the light, the twin frequencies, connecting into each aspect of you on every level, known and unknown. the invitation to return to your natural state of alignment and resonance, the artifacts of dissonance gathering, then falling away at the universal drain. The divine is becoming you, and you are becoming the divine, and the river is flowing. 6. 5. Four. Feeling fully whatever is coming up, holding nothing back, going into the feeling, the emotion, the physical sensations, or in whatever way it is coming up for you to engage. Three. 3. 2. 1. Beautiful. If you'd like to sustain the transmission, I invite you to pause or just turn the volume down, knowing that when you conclude, you'll return the universal plug and know the transmission will come to a close. Continuing on into our third segment, Q&A and integration. Now, okay. Continuing on, I'm affirming the plug has been pulled. We have begun. Opening into our third and final segment for today. We'll open or start with questions before we open to reflections. So if there are any questions coming up in this circle, in the Zoom room, so to speak, you can just unmute your line and begin talking. And for anyone who is on another platform right now and wishes you were part of the Zoom room, you can do so by registering at exploringdivineresonance.com, which you can do for free. And then you can participate in the Zoom room each week, download a transcript of each session, the audio and video recordings for each session, and more, weekly study guides, and so on. Okay, questions first.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Susan.
I'd like to revisit an old theme, if I may.
Of course.
Stuff keeps coming up, so I guess I'm not finished with it. It's to do with not sending anybody anything. Some time ago, I was introduced to this concept of the power of 8. The idea being that 8 people get together in a circle and send healing prayers to somebody who needs healing. Mm-hmm. And the explanation was that when you send to somebody else, you yourself benefit from it. You also get healing, which is a concept that comes up with Reiki and various other, when you help somebody else, when you send whatever it is that you benefit, you get, because you do, and actually the concept is helping somebody else. So it's not that I'm trying, I don't want to contradict you. It's just that I'd like your reflection, because it seems like they're the opposites. So it's a paradox.
There are opposites here. You're, of course, yeah. And I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just acknowledging and agreeing. Is there more you want to say about this or ask about it, Susan?
Well, I understand that there's different ways. I mean, when you pray for someone else, you don't have to direct it. You can just pray for their highest good. I'm going to get twisted up in my words here, because I'm not disagreeing that you don't direct. If I'm praying for somebody, I'm not saying, God, do this for this person. So I'm very much aware of that. but still, I would like your comments on, so how do you do this, but don't do this?
So it's funny because I had this idea that I should hook up my sketch pad before I started today. And I put the cabling in place, but I didn't bother to go through the process of hooking it up. So we'll see if I can get somewhere without making sketches. And then if I can't, I'll plug it in and we'll have the sketch pad out too. Really, it's a great question. I'm really grateful that you're bringing it up. It points out the disparity, the contradictions that exist between the first three stages of consciousness, right? So in what you're referring to, first of all, let's acknowledge Lynn McTaggart for her work around the groups of eight, right? That's she is the originator of that idea and has done all sorts of wonderful work in this regard and so on, and credit where credit is due. Is that true? Do I have that right? Is it Lynn's work?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, yes.
beautiful.
Well, she's the one who formalized it into the power of eight, but other
Sure.
people have
Other people have
described the
acknowledged it.
same.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing new, right?
Yeah. So all I can do is reflect on how I perceive, right? So I'm going to now release myself from disclaiming everything I say and just going to tell you how I perceive it. You take it with however many grains of salt you want, and we can have a discussion and whatever you want. It's not about trying to overwhelm or overcome or anything like that. The metaphysics of stage 2 are directly contradicted by the metaphysics of stage 3. And furthermore, and here's another way of saying it. The physics of 2 are contradicted by the physics of 3 stages of consciousness I'm referring to. But also the physics, the cosmologies of 2 are contradicting stage 1. And so the movement if we're going to just work within stage 2 consciousness, this concept, this idea is beautiful and has no limit, has no end of power, right? But to my view, oops, I'm disclaiming, and I said I wasn't going to. Although I speak so emphatically, maybe it's helpful for me to pepper a few of these things in. So if we're holding an intention, whether we're holding it for someone else or not, all that happens if I hold it for someone else is that I may have less attachment, right? I mean, let's say you're having some discomfort, right? You, Susan, and you hold an intention for healing to descend upon your body and you're going to feel better. Presumably you have lots of attachment to that because you're not feeling well, right? So if you're having pain, you there's a level of connection to that discomfort that you have with yourself that's different than, let's say, if I'm in pain and you hold an intention for me for healing to descend upon me. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that happens in this dynamic is that by focusing on the other, whoever it is, the one that the group of 8 is focused on, right? Which I think I interviewed Lynn before the book was released, and but I never read the book, and so I'm speaking out of turn here. But I believe the group of 8 it could include the person for whom the intention is focused on. Is that true? Or is the intention only on someone outside the group of 8? Only ever outside the group of 8?
From what I remember, because it's back a while,
Yeah.
I mean, the group can take turns and have
Exactly.
but the idea is that the person who is being worked on is not part of the group of 8.
Oh,
They're
is not
just
part of the group of 8.
They're
Okay,
not. They're
beautiful.
just
Yeah.
receiving.
Yeah. Right. But so then the point is that the only recipients of the group of 8 are ever outside of the group of 8. So the group of 8 never has an issue with the energy of someone within the group being the recipient of the intention. Am I understanding that right?
If I understood what you said, yes.
So let's say that's true, right? That there's a cleaner version there. That's a cleaner expression because there's less attachment to it, right? And so, but the thing is, what is the role of an intention? What is happening with an intention? I mean, let's try to set it up in a way that makes it easy, but in an uncharged way to see it. Okay. So you are the ocean. Okay. You're in a state of being, stage 3.
Mhm.
You are being the ocean, right? Do you hold any intentions?
No.
You're just being the ocean, right?
Right.
And what are some of the things that are happening while you're being the ocean? Currents? Are currents involved?
Yes.
Sure. Waves? Are waves part of what's happening?
Yes.
Um,
All the little creatures running around.
creatures
Swimming.
are and they're living, they're dying,
Yes.
they're being born. There's all different kinds of life that's expressing as part of and the life isn't all, at least to a conventional view, isn't all sentient. I mean, I don't know
There's
that I would.
rocks in there too. Yeah.
I mean, right? The consciousness
Right.
of the animals is different than the consciousness of the kelp, let's say. At least
Right.
that's what some people would argue. I don't agree with that, but it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
You're just being the ocean, right? All these things are happening. Okay. Now you're the ocean, but you're in stage 2. So none of these things are happening because you have to hold intention. So you have to intend for waves to be cast. You have to get currents happening. Now the plankton have to do their thing, and dot 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 dot. Right? The whole world is being created by your thoughts. Your consciousness is causing it to come into being. What's the role of the intention?
If I'm understanding you, stage 3 consciousness just lets whatever is be. Like, if the creature is injured, it's injured. If the wave is running, it's running. It's there. Like, there's no direction. It's just, well, there's the direction of the essence within whatever's happening. There's no, I'm getting that. I'm saying that. But does that mean there's no place for um there's no place for Lynn McTaggart's work, for example?
No, I'm not saying this. Here's the hard part about this, right? Each part of the developmental journey is essential. We actually, like, one interpretation of me commenting this way in the past has been, well, Ken, it sounds like you're knocking the whole personal mastery part of life. That seems like a bunch of hogwash. Personal mastery is essential. I agree, but there's a glass ceiling to my view. I mean, as long as you're in charge, there's separation there. And you're in what I would describe as an empowered and unintegrated experience.
But wait a minute.
Okay.
If I'm praying for somebody else, I'm not putting myself in charge. I'm asking who I assume is in charge to do something on their behalf.
Right. But here's the question. what is the origin of the thing that is not right within the other?
It's probably within themselves. They did it. They probably did it to themselves.
And let's burrow into it even more. What is the actual source of it? Let me say it differently. Is it something other than God or the divine, if God is not the right name, or the universe or source or fill in the blank? Okay.
That's it's a tricky one. I mean, God, so from a perspective, God allows me to do, well, I have free will, I have free choice. I have the, well, in theory. If I don't, then what's the point?
Well, I mean, is that a rhetorical question or a real question?
Well, I'm just thinking it through. If I don't have any choice, then I might as well just be a computer. Well, an automaton. Like if I'm not making any choices, I mean, certain things I think I have choice, but it's not really a choice. And don't ask me to figure out what that is right now because the mind isn't working. But if I'm not doing things that are creating whatever it's creating, then what's the point of my exploring anything?
Well, look, there's a long answer and there's a short answer, and I want to offer the short answer because I want to come back to the question, right? To my view, Keating said this to me, Thomas Keating said this to me when I interviewed him, and it was so clear in this statement. He said, we live in the thinly veiled illusion of free will, which was just a devastatingly beautiful shattering of the illusion. Or at least for some people, that statement can be devastatingly shattering, because what he's saying really clearly is that we're not actually other than God, even though we think we are. And the way I interpret that is to say the illusion of separation is God's greatest gift to us. And it is through the illusion of separation or the illusion of control or the illusion of free will that we discover who we are and who we are not. Let's say on the who we are not level, we are not separate from the divine. But, right? So if you think about holding an intention, the intention effectively, at least to my way of perceiving it, says at some level, I need to direct this. It is up to me to change this, because what is other than the true expression of who we are, which to my view, which may not resonate at all, right, is like saying, I am not the ocean, but I am the ocean. I'm the ocean. I'm going to cast the currents and I'm going to cast the waves, but I am not one with the ocean. And just to try to unconfuse this a little bit or unmuddy the water, that exploration that I'm in charge of the ocean is really essential developmentally. It's a big deal. And it delivers everyone to the same glass ceiling. And that glass ceiling is whatever I can affect, ultimately, the divine expression is the dominant expression here, not the separate I.
So I want to go to the opposite end. So, for example, when we spoke about it last time, the concept was if there's an accident in front of you, you'll call 911.
Sure.
So if that's so, if everything is divine and I'm the divine and I am the accent, why call 911?
Look, there's a level of I'm trying to think of the there's a philosophical term that describes this. It's not part of my awareness right now. It's not in my lexicon at the moment. But we could describe it in terms of a strict duality or a strict non-duality interpretation, right? Non-duality would say, if everything is an illusion, why am I engaged with it? That would be another way of asking the same question.
Yeah,
Why
that's
call
exactly it.
911 if everything is an illusion, right? It's a bit of a nihilistic approach to things, right? And but the problem is, at least to my view, that both non-dualism and dualism are existing concurrently. And the question that we're trying to figure out, it seems to me, at least in the context of our discussion, is which is true, which is a question of polarity. It's a question of or. But
Hmm.
this is not a question of or. It's a question of and. Okay? So if what is it that we're practicing in, if we're holding intention in a group of 8? We're practicing our empowered selves. But at least to my way of viewing it, we're practicing that from a place of separation. But notice, stage 2 is an aspect of stage 4, but now it's integrated, which is why I believe there are so many people who are running around talking about how they're fully enlightened, but they're dancing in stage 2, and it's confusing about what is happening, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
I make your life the way you want it to. This is what union looks like. Those are 2 totally different experiences, but they're look-alike. If you ask somebody in union to talk about how they're creating, I believe they would look at you with a blank look, and maybe they might utter some things, but they would all be allegorical. It would not be a direct answer. It would not be, well, I'm holding an intention, I'm letting go of the how, and I'm just knowing that this outcome is, I'm feeling the experience of this, and this is now unfolding. This is, at least to my view, my perceptual view, that is not union. That is a separate experience. But there is an empowered, integrated experience. And so in 2, we're practicing that.
Okay, I see. It occurs to me that when you get 8 people together to set their mind on the same thing, um, you've got a union of 8. So they're not separate selves. You've got these 8 consciences forming forming a sort of a unit.
I mean, look, to me, it's interesting and it's uninteresting, right? What's interesting about this is what does this mean? What does this illuminate within me, let's say, or within this discussion? It's uninteresting in this sense. What matters about this? Who cares, right? I mean, what's
Right.
interesting, let me put it a different way, is where is this rubbing me the wrong way, or where is this rubbing you the wrong way? What is the struggle with this? If there is no struggle, then engage with it, go dancing with it fully, right? I mean, far be it for me to say this is a waste of time. It's not a waste of time. It's sort of like saying to somebody, listen, this disempowered dynamic that you're engaged in is a waste of time. No, it's not a waste of time. And I mean, somebody who's in a disempowered experience dukes up. Are you telling me that I'm not actually struggling in this way, right? Or if you tell somebody who's an empowered dynamic, this whole empowered dance that you're doing, Susan, this is a waste of time. You know, dukes up. Are you telling me that I can't make a difference? Are you telling me I can't transform the world and make things? No, that's not what I'm saying, right? It's pointless. That part of it is pointless. And I don't mean it's pointless like we're wasting our time. I mean, there are developmentally essential aspects of the experience of empowerment and disempowerment. And in 4, there is an integrated and disempowered experience that is an aspect of 4. There is an empowered and integrated experience in 4. What's different is it's not unintegrated. And if we get into a discussion of, well, what's the difference between integrated and unintegrated? I think, why are we wasting our time?
No,
You know,
I'm not going there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that for me is not an interesting question. It's like we're sitting around engaged in, I suppose the term would be some form of mental masturbation. It's just what's the value? It doesn't move us anywhere. It doesn't bring us to clarity. Maybe it leaves us feeling more justified in approaching life from the perspective we are. But if somebody says to me, can I feel justified in perceiving the world the way I do? I would say, heck yeah. And why are you asking me? If somebody says to me, can you explain to me the limitation associated with empowered and separate? I would say it will present itself in due course. And until it does, don't hold back. And when it does, you won't be holding back with anything. It's not, it's like saying to somebody, someday, this car that you're driving, the engine is going to blow up. It's going to come to an end. The metal fatigue, it's going to happen. And maybe that engine is a commercial diesel engine for a bus, a commercial bus. And the point at which it blows up is 1,000,000 miles. And there are 10,000 miles on the odometer. There's a long way to go. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's a brand that is good for 300,000 to 500,000 miles. Or maybe it's a brand that's only good for 100,000 miles. But it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 miles on the odometer. Does that make sense? Now, if on the other hand, you've driven this thing into the ground and you're like, well, I'm going to get one of those cars that has a 500,000 mile engine. And you practice that, and then you drove that into the ground, and you're like, wait a second, I want to find the engine that doesn't have this limitation. The answer to that question in this metaphorical, bizarre example that I'm trying to articulate here, the answer to that question is, it's not an engine you have to acquire. It's divine expression that's already within you. The only thing you have to do is let go of control. That's a meaningful answer to somebody who has gone out and engaged with all these different expressions of control. But if you haven't engaged with them, if you haven't really given them their due, it doesn't matter. And the thing is, if you haven't, surrender is not a meaningful answer. It's irrelevant. All there is stage 2. And in truth, listen, in absolute truth, you might be right. We sit together in 8 and we're in union consciousness and we don't even realize it. What I grate against is the idea that we have to trade to receive, that we have to issue something. That whole idea is just smacks of separation. And it also sounds a lot like what goes on for people who are wired the way I am in my Enneagram point. So my Enneagram point is a 2, and I'm a self-pres or a me first 2. People who are wired the way that I'm wired, we think we have to give to receive. That is not true. It's just fundamentally not true, and it leads to all sorts of distortions. It's a distortion that I perceive that exists in the spiritual world in a huge way because of the things that you're talking about. We don't have to do anything to earn God's love. We don't have to hustle around the track or be more perfect or anything. That love, that extraordinary presence is within all of us without any limitation.
Thank you. Okay. Now I understand better now where you're coming from, and I understand better what I was asking. Um, like from your describing your perspective, I'm getting better glimmerings of what stage 3 might look like for me.
The
So
other thing
thank you.
you're welcome. The other thing I will say to you is that I have had I have been living a master class about the nature of energy for the last, well, since January of 2008. So what is that? It's 13 years now. Am I doing my math right? 13 plus years. So over the last 13 plus years, I have had this master class every single day, over and over and over and over again. If I perceive things as separate, if I have to go out, there's noise, there's dissonance everywhere. If I sink within myself and discover those aspects that are of me, that are expressing as you, and da 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 da, amazing things happen. And I can tell you that I'm not sending jack diddly to anyone. I am not even involved. I am just experiencing what is real, which is really, that's sort of loaded language these days, because all these different people want to claim, well, here's what's real and here's what's real. Well, okay, whatever. You know, I don't even want to get into a discussion about that. That's not what I'm trying to address. I'm trying to say what is really real, the wholeness of who we are is unambiguous and ubiquitous. It's not, it doesn't have to be sent anywhere. That's like saying God is not here and God is here, which from stage 1 is totally spot on. It's the battle between good and evil, the light and dark, et cetera, et cetera. You see what I mean? So that's why I want to disengage with, but it's also why I said at the beginning, depending on which stage of consciousness you're in or where you're working, the way that I'm talking about this, my approach or the way that God expresses through me may or may not even resonate. It may just sound like, you know, somebody crunching a guitar in a way that doesn't, you know, you're just like, I just turn it off. I don't want to listen to that. It doesn't sound right. And that's okay. I mean, that's fine. It's not a problem at all.
Well, I listen to everything. I just filter it and go, okay, how does this fit in what I heard before?
Beautiful.
But thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Opening for questions still, if there are any other questions that are coming up. Oh,
Yeah,
Angelica's got her line open. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I think from every practice, prayer or whatever you do, there can be the grace or whatever you call it, or finally you come to a place where the wholeness will take you over. Even if in the beginning you were in a place of separation. And so sometimes I think these stages might not be that separate for some people. I know for you it was really very dramatic, but maybe sometimes you are in a prayer meeting or whatever, where there is, you know, definitely you and God. And you might be able, with your own connection, to have the door open for you. to not have that separation anymore. And that probably works for any practice one might be doing, or meditation or whatever else people do. That was just my comment. Thank you. If you want to say something to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think not only is that a possibility, I think it's true, and I think it's true for everyone. It's actually what's going on all the time. We are actually whole. The only reason why I think it's important to discuss separation is to recognize those aspects that are enlivened by the promise of control. And even that isn't that interesting, except if one is struggling with it. But in other words, if it resonates, explore it, and it will always lead to the experience of wholeness. I mean, that's what's going on all the time. We are all fully integrated. The experience of separation isn't even real, it's just an illusion. And it is that illusory dynamic is, pointing us with sharp arrows into wholeness all the time. So I think it's an important thing that you're saying, and it strikes me as 100% spot on. And I mean, the reality is, I don't even think we can begin to talk about what is really going on. So it's almost like the more we engage in discussing it, the less on point we are, if that makes sense, which I think is one of the things that you're saying, Angelica, and I think that's true. Ultimately, we're going to have an experience of our union, our essential nature, and whatever leads us there is beautiful. Whatever it is. I'm thinking of an example right now. Doesn't Eckhart talk about this in his book, The Power of Now? Somebody is in a dynamic where there's an accident and they have superhuman strength and can lift the car. What's going on there? I don't know that there's commentary from Eckhart on it, but he's talking about being totally present, as I recall. It's been years since I read the book, but he's talking about once you're totally present, there's an extraordinary array of things that are available. So where is the superhuman strength coming from? And I mean, by any measure, an accident would appear to be a pathway into dissonance or of separation, but inevitably what's opening for that individual is an experience of union that is so profound. How does that doorway open? To me, it's just an indication of the pervasive nature of the truth. It's always there, whatever the thing is that whatever causes the veil to thin and then evaporate. Hallelujah. And whatever causes it to thicken. Hallelujah. The totality of our experience is beautiful, for sure. Other questions or reflections coming up?
I wanted to comment on today's part 1. I lost most of the words you said, but as you got towards the end, just before you described the 3 tools or the 3 methods for the, I forget exactly what it was, but before you described the art or journaling or sitting with it, I forget exactly what it was you said, but all of a sudden I felt like an opening in the pelvis. And there was this huge, just, I can't even describe it, but it was like, shall I say, an invitation to just enter into, it was like a dark, but dark, not in the sense of creepy, just a dark, you know, just a place to explore. So it was quite an experience.
It's interesting, Susan, that you're sharing that, because I mean, this just reinforces what Angelica just said, right?
Yes.
I'm, you know, who knows what the heck I'm saying, blah, 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 blah. It wasn't about the words. You can't even remember the words, right? So that wasn't the thing. Something just opened. And all of a sudden there's this place to go exploring. And, you know, cut me off or correct me, dark in the sense that unexplored, unknown, but not creepy, not problematic, just an opening, an invitation to a deeper exploration of some unknown interior space. Boom. The word, I mean, maybe we'll do this next week. We could just sit in absolute silence. I'll say absolutely nothing for real. Listen, I'm working on, revision number 800 of my book or something right now. And I'm confident these lines will be in the closing of the revision, or at least that's how it appears to me now. Mind you, I'm only in chapter 3 rewrites right now. So who knows what happens by the time I get to the end. But, the closing line of the book as it is something like, why so many words when so few are necessary? It's as if everything has taken place between the inhalation and the exhalation. For it has. In other words, blah, blah, blah. Be gone. Let's release all of this. All of this commitment to all of these words and all of this understanding just doesn't matter. It's already here. Let's just be with it now.
So it's going to be a really short book then.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, this is the thing. It's the question is always, what is meaningful, right? But everything is meaningful. I mean, if I said to you, what about today was important and what wasn't important? Because I'm going to go back, I'm going to edit this. I want to turn this session into the most distilled experience for anyone who listens to the next part. If everyone turned in their edits, first of all, they'd be different, right?
Right.
And then what would change? What isn't important? It's like saying to you, Susan, in your life, however long you've been alive, what didn't you need to live? What experiences did you not need to have? Let's cut those out.
Well, I could quite happily cut out breaking my thumb.
But was there anything good that came of the experience? Did you have an insight into who you are or anything as it related to breaking your thumb? Or was it entirely superfluous?
Well, I was about 10 or 11 at the time. It got me out of gym class.
Anyway, you see my point, right? It's like what isn't important. And this is sort of like the progression. If we all started out with igniting resonance, and I taught this live. I taught igniting resonance, then amplifying resonance, then embodying resonance, then spiritual mastery and spiritual messenger mastery. We'd sit together maybe for 2 or 3 years to go through that sequence of classes. Okay. And what would happen at the beginning is I'd be talking and talking, and then over time, less and less, and then eventually mostly silence. So was the talking not important?
I don't know. Maybe.
Maybe, right, maybe.
I'll have to ask my hips.
See, my point is, at least as I perceive it, especially when I surrendered, I looked at my life and I went, oh, this was all necessary. This was all so meaningful. I didn't mess up anything. I did exactly what I needed to do to get to this point. Everything was perfect. And if by having discussions about things that don't make sense, that opens up, or by teaching a structure that's going to disappear, that opens us into a space where we can go into the unknown better, more completely, fully. Is there something wrong with it? No. And probably, actually, I can tell you definitively, the reason I'm rewriting right now is because I'm disappearing out of the book. I am integrating out of the book. But that there's still a book there. There are still words. It's just that there's a transmission under those words that now is unfettered, or at least to my view, more fully complete. And if somebody is in the consciousness where words don't matter, they will have that experience of the book. And if they're in the consciousness where words matter, then they do matter, and they'll be important and contribute to their experience of the book, if that makes better sense.
So in other words, the book is not you.
Right. In other words, here's another way of saying it. In other words, Lynn McTaggart's work is absolutely essential. Especially if you're drawn to it.
Well, it wasn't that I was drawn to it. It's just that I guess I'll say my forte is puzzles. So I'm looking at these different pieces of the puzzle. And so I came across her work, and I have I have been in whatever attuned for Reiki, and I read the works of various sages. And here you were saying, but that's in separation. And I'm going, is all of that, like, does none of it have any connection? Like, is it all worthless? And so now you've explained, and it gives me a different picture. And it means that the next time I encounter a situation, I will react differently. Like, for one thing, I will go into my hips and get out of my head, and I will look for a fuller, what's the word I want? Like, I look for information from more than just my thoughts to determine what should I do here. And I mean, I don't know where it'll go. I don't know if it'll help, but I'll find out.
Beautiful. That's beautiful, Susan. Any other questions or reflections before we wrap up for today?
Hi, Ken, this is Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Hey, Brada. It's great listening to everybody's perspective and everything. And I was reflecting back as we were going through the energy today. And Saturday, I thought it was really powerful. For me, it felt like it went 2 hours, and it felt really deep, and even though there was no talking, there was no nothing, I found myself very glad I wasn't driving Rovi, for sure. That I was still at home, safe in a chair, and then laying down later. But it felt like a 2-hour process with literally no sound, which was interesting for me because that was very cool. And today felt like very deep dive for me. And it felt, somebody had talked about dark or something like that. And for me, in the shamanic world, the infinite void is like huge, for me. And so I feel that a lot of times only in reverse, because for me the infinite void is the upper world, but then with the deep diving with you, it feels like down at the bottom of the ocean, which is really a cool feeling. And so it's been a real interesting process for me as I've been experiencing the different pieces and things, if that even makes any kind of sense. But so the words for me are good, and the silence for me is good, and then the insights from the team is really good. So it's kind of like, yeah, I like it all.
Beautiful, Gary.
But thank you very much, you and the team. Love you, man. Appreciate everyone.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Love you too. Just so everyone's sort of aware of the references that Gary is talking about, this past Saturday, the members of the Deep Dive Circle, which is a retreat group that has been together for, some of the people in that circle have been together now for a year. Others more recent additions to the circle, and there's room for more, actually. I'll tell you how you can be part of the Deep Dive Circle if you'd like to. But what Gary was talking about is this past Saturday, we normally would have gathered for a transmission over in the Zoom room, in a Zoom room, and that transmission on Saturday would have been entirely in silence, no talking at all. But still, we would sit together in the circle, and my camera would have been on, and maybe other people have their camera on or off or whatever, but we were sitting together, and then there's a recording of it and so on. And this past week, we did a deep dive, I guess it was deep dive 27, maybe last Thursday. And we did a deep dive on Thursday, a retreat. It was a longer one. And we talked about, what do we want to do on Saturday? Do we want to be together in the Zoom room, or do we want to do an experiment? And the group decided, let's do an experiment. Let's gather energetically, but without any voice connection, without any, in other words, no outward evidence that we're even sitting in a circle together. And to my recollection, this is actually the first time a group has sort of consciously chosen to gather in that way virtually. So, I mean, there are members of the circle who are all around the world, and we gathered then at the time that we had appointed, but there was no Zoom room going on. And the transmission itself was scheduled to be 90 minutes. And so when Gary says, I had the experience of it being 2 hours, he's talking about in his sort of linear awareness, it wasn't contained or confined to that 90-minute window. And there are lots of other things that Gary's talking about as well. And I think his comments, I mean, of course, his comments stand. I just wanted to offer that additional context. If you are interested in being part of the Deep Dive Circle, and there are a number of other circles that go on regularly. In fact, there's a weekly circle, there are monthly circles, there are every other weekly circles, and so on. All of those, and in fact, all the classes that I just made reference to a minute ago, igniting resonance, amplifying, embodying resonance, spiritual mastery, and spiritual messenger mastery, all of those classes, plus the deep dive and all these other transmissions, all these other groups and circles are included with Resonance Institute membership, which right now is just $97 a month. And you can find out more and register and so on at resonanceinstitutemembership.com. And I think there's probably a link in the description for how you can join. If you're in the Zoom room now, I think there's a link in the bottom of the email about how to join if you're interested in joining, or you can always just drop me an email keeping track of those details is not resonant for you and you just want a direct link, you can drop me an email and I'm happy to drop you a link. There are lots of different ways that we gather, different conversations that happen, and through all of them is this beautiful opening to a deeper encounter with the divine. And the most important thing from my perspective is that it happened on your terms, which probably sounds a bit paradoxical since I spend time and energy trying to describe a process and a practice and here's how this works and blah, blah, blah. And then, as I've just said, and we'll say over and over again, if we stay together, if you continue on with this circle or do other circles with me, you'll hear this from me again and again and again. What I'm saying doesn't matter. The things that I'm teaching are not important. They're only important if they're important for you. And then once their importance is satisfied, they will fade away for you as well. And if they've already faded away, great, just tune out the words. They'll tune out naturally. They're not important. The thing that God expresses through me most essentially, there's no way to even describe it. It's just an enlivenment of the divine in you. And the experience and exploration of that can be such a beautiful journey, a beautiful addition, another dimensional aspect of life that is already opening for all of us. That's the key here. It's not that this is happening because it's not going to, or something is taking place that would never, unless you, no, none of that. It's who we all are. It's just an opportunity to open into it at a deeper level. We'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any other questions or comments before we close the circle for today. You can just unmute yourself if anything's coming up you'd like to share. Okay, deep breath in. Hold. And as you release this breath, let go of everything that we have explored and talked about. Even if you haven't heard a word, let go even of the experience that has unfolded for you in our time together. For as you let go of all of that, you instantly open to an even deeper encounter and experience of the divine, of the mystical dimension of life, which eventually you realize and experience is not a dimension. It is all there is. I invite you to begin returning the universal plug. I'll do the same as I begin bringing this transmission to a close. Such an honor to sit with you, to explore, to resonate with and without words. Plug all the way in. Transmission to a close now. Until we're together again very soon. Peace.